Hello and welcome to Ophelia House. I'm your host, Leila Shamash, and today I thought that I would film a little reading vlog of our first book club pick, which is the Fairies and Their Friends Between Revolutions. I have read this before, I do know that I love it, and I selected it because I wanted something kind of fun and easy to start off the book club with, and I feel like in a lot of ways right now we are between revolutions, and I feel like the aesthetic of this book is perfect for the Yule season. And our first book club discussion will be on the solstice, December 21, and I would love to see you there. And yeah, let's get into it. Hi, I just reread Tourmaline's preface in this 2022 Nightboat edition that was written in 2019, and I find it very resonant. Hello. So as you saw the other day, I went to Hive to read the introduction. I thought I'd share some thoughts with you about it. And then later today, I am planning to go to the library and hopefully finish the book. Okay, so I took some notes on the intro, which basically provides a history of Lavender Hill, which was the commune that the author lived on in the late 60s and 70s. The author of the introduction, Morgan Basichis, is like introducing us to the book and telling us a bit about the community and how they and Lavender Hill have evolved since the time of original publication, and the impact of AIDS, gentrification, cancer, and then they describe it as a record of a decade of experiments in radical communal living and queer friendship in the late 60s and 70s. So I feel like there's so much within the text that offers us in our generation insight into precedent and possibility. Larry Mitchell had family money and an apartment on the Upper West Side and a PhD from Columbia in sociology. So his like radical living and his art did seem to like have a basis of some privilege. And so like we can hold that and also note how he seems to have used it to bring beautiful art into the world and also share it with his friends. That is like a recurring theme, that the more you share, the less you need. I find that extremely inspiring, actually. I also listened to the audiobook of Mutual Aid by Dean Spade, which I found paired very well with this introduction. I had first encountered Dean Spade in my women's studies degree. We read him and Miss Major. Miss Major is mentioned in this intro as well. Love that. But then I appreciated the way that Basicis noted that the original Lavender Hill commune was made up mostly of white people, or entirely of white people, mostly Jews and Italians. And I also really appreciated the sort of land acknowledgement that they made about where the commune was located in upstate New York, the unceded historic territory of the Cayuga Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I feel like those acknowledgements of the whiteness of the group and the colonial context of white people creating queer communes in America just like really helps to connect queer and trans liberation with the greater context of liberation from white supremacy and colonialism as well. And I think that a lot of what I know in terms of radical theory is rooted in these connected movements of the 20th century, which like this introduction makes clear, like we're really working together and influencing each other. So I'm talking about like the women's movement, the gay and lesbian liberation movement, and the civil rights movement, as well as the anti-war movement in terms of the war in Vietnam. And I see how like these issues are still completely relevant and ongoing. We have like this sort of legacy from the gay and lesbian movement. Now we're fighting more specifically for trans rights, trans liberation, civil rights, BLM, and the anti-war movement, Palestine. And yeah, I'm really interested in like these ideological origins, which they describe as feminist, gay, socialist thinking, radical anti-assimilationist, gay political consciousness, and the shape of gay consciousness as the world ends. I love, and I remembered very strongly from my first read a couple years ago, the quote about marriage in the military. I was thrilled to be gay because there were two things I didn't have to do now: go into the army or get married. And of course, over the years, the two things that the gay movement fought for was to be able to go into the army and get married. I remember that so clearly. It really resonates in my mind. It makes me want to read Against Equality, Revolution, Not Inclusion. But also, I personally do want to get gay married, and I'm really actually scared about the potential for gay marriage to be overturned in America. And I'm also really interested in how they describe in this intro Lavender Hill as a multi-gender space influenced by lesbian, feminist, separatist movements. And then I just have some notes on things that I loved. Like, I love the reference to moosewood. I grew up with that cookbook in my house. Like, my mom had it. I remember very clearly the enchanted broccoli forest. I love the image of crocheting. I love the image of roses and glitter on the tomb. I love the imagery of how they're living today, gardening, caring for their cats. I just love that. I was also very interested in the references to witchcraft. David was cruising in the rambles in Central Park when he met a gay witch who gave him a flyer for a gay liberation front meeting. Isn't this how all of us got into activism? It was the fall of 1969, a few months after the rebellion against the NYPD at the Stonewall Inn. David and Larry joined a gay study group inspired by feminist consciousness-raising circles led by fellow GLF member Arthur Evans, author of the book Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture. And then I love the reference to Fairy Circle, which I assume is like the Radical Fairies, which was or is a witchcraft group comprised mostly, I think, of gay men. Then the other theme that I highlighted in this intro was friendship. I found it really resonant that friendship is a means and end amidst unceasing violence. The idea that queer friendship saves us, Also, the emphasis that friendship is an action, not an idea or a status, something that you do over and over. When it's your friend's birthday, you bake their favorite cake and make them a beautiful card from thick pieces of paper and stickers, the extra sheets and pillows for visitors, the snack in the fridge for them. Also, just like the recognition of the pain of falling out and relationship strain. I also always remember that relationships got strained, something you are familiar with if you've ever been a part of relationships. I just find that line so good. It's been resonating in my mind for years. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the intro. Oh, I also find it very interesting that the press that Mitchell founded to self-publish this book, he named Calamus Press, which is a reference to the Greek myth of Calamos, who was transformed into a river reed after he drowned himself, mourning his lover. That reminds me of Ophelia, so everything is connected via the river. What if Ophelia lived and told her story? Hello. It is the next day. I am still reading The Fairies and Their Friends. I finished part 1 at the BPL yesterday, but then I had to go. So I'm planning to read part 2 today. I'm actually thinking of going to Bluestockings, but I thought I would tell you just a couple of thoughts on part 1 before I do that. I literally love every page in this book so much. I am tempted to just like read the whole book out loud and say everything that I love, but I thought that I would limit it to 2 main points that I wanted to make. The first is about page 1, where it says the first revolutions destroyed the great cultures of the women. Once the men triumphed, all that was other from them was considered inferior and therefore only worthy of abuse and contempt and extinction. Stories told of these times are of heroic action and terrifying defeat and silent waiting. Stories told of these times make the fairies and their friends weep. This really makes me think of the witch trials, which destroyed the great cultures of the women, as well as indigenous genocide, which destroyed the great cultures of the women. And yeah, the second revolutions made many of the people less poor and a small group of men without color very rich. I feel like this book is very involved with the history of capitalism as it's tied up with white supremacy. A lot of my notes here are like America, falling empires, the last cry of the white man, capitalist patriarchy, like class consciousness, working class wisdom. The other thing that I specifically wanted to talk about was from Women Wisdom on page 20. The strong women told the fairies that there are 2 important things to remember about the coming revolutions. The first is that we will get our asses kicked. The second is that we will win. I love that. It elaborates they had never thought about winning before. Winning was like surviving, only better. Winning elevated the entire enterprise of making revolution. I feel like this to me speaks to the direct connection between the women's movement in the 20th century and gay and lesbian liberation movement. That like the wins of feminism did and do provide an example of what is possible with organizing, that when you organize for change, it happens. And of course, we're seeing backlash But as Gloria Steinem said when she went on the L Word, if there hadn't been a front lash, there wouldn't be a backlash. Or there wouldn't be a backlash if there hadn't been a front lash. So with that, I am going to go now to Bluestockings and try to finish the book. Okay, hello. So I have finished the book. So I went to Bluestockings and I read part 2, The Energy of Oppression. Part 1, by the way, was called The Way It Is. The Way It Is. Okay, so these were some of my favorite parts and things I wanted to say. I love the fairy gardens, the great gardens of the fairies. And I love, 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 love nothing can defeat the spirit of the earth. The fairies know that the earth will not tolerate the men much longer. The earth, scarred and gouged and stripped and bombed, will deny life to the men in order to stop the men. The fairies have left the men's reality in order to destroy it by making a new one. Amen. Okay, then I did have something I wanted to say about page 58. It says, in winter, the fairies live in long log houses. They learned how to build the long houses from the gentle people who once lived on the land. So I feel like that's a reference to Iroquois longhouses. But then it says, the gentle people are now gone from the land. The men, believing the gentleness would disappear when the gentle people vanished, slaughtered them. And I think that that is like a little bit wrong because Indigenous people are still here. And I actually think that's one of like the myths of the men, that, oh, there was colonization, it was very violent, it was in the past now and it's over and there's no Indigenous people left. It's actually very convenient along the lines of something that I think is put very well later in this book in regard to the queens. It says, of the men, in regard to the queens, it says, once the men tried to stop the queens. First, they declared them non-existent. If they did not exist, no man could be punished for harming them since they did not exist. So I feel like that is like a perfect way of explaining this phenomenon of like, well, if Indigenous people are gone from the land, then there's no ongoing colonial violence, but that's not true. Indigenous people are still here and the violence of colonialism is ongoing. So I don't think that like the fairies and their friends invented that myth or want to endorse its like logical consequences. I feel like this is a way that the propaganda of the men has infiltrated the beliefs of the authors of this book at the time that it was written. And then when we're remembering, okay, like this is describing Lavender Hill, a commune of white queer people in upstate New York, it complicates things a little bit if the liberation of queers is not in harmony with the liberation of Indigenous people. So that's just something I think to really reflect upon for the coming revolutions and how Indigenous and queer and trans liberation can be entwined. Oh, I love the yoga on page 64. This is something that resonated in my mind from my first reading as well. I just love the great goddess of the earth, and the fairies special books have led the fairies into a living ritual. The yoga of play, fantasies, picking flowers, being with cats, weaving and baking and crocheting and potting and sewing and painting, the long dry plants hanging upside down from the ceiling. I also love the description of a sunset as the crack in the world. I love that when the fairies visit the fairies, it's like entering a wonderful dream. I love everything. I have like every page underlined. I love lilac and pine tree. I feel like I really identify with lilac, who's a romantic addict. I love that pine tree dreams of a glorious nonviolent revolution. I love the care for heavenly blue. I just love that so much. Just that illustration of care and community. I love that they painted the house pink and the trim lavender, sparkles. I love the references to tarot and astrology, pussycats. I love on page 87 about Daffodil and Wood Thrush, the last sentence, their life has become elegant and stable, allowing warmth and sharing and radical action to flow outwards. That is just total goals in my view. I find it impressive that the revolution has come so far and looks so beautiful, and Lilac is thrilled. Like, I feel like for me that's really vital when I'm imagining revolution, is like I'm thinking of something beautiful that isn't like about violence and destruction, but about the capacity to live surrounded by beauty and peace. Okay, I find this very interesting on page 92 in regard to Pine Tree's hopeless and so seemingly realistic assessment of the power of the men. Well, of course, that is what the men want you to believe. But everyone will die if the men are allowed to go on with their ways, even the men. Those who do not want to die just yet must stop them, and we will. Love that. I also love the fresh fruit from the fairies and whipped cream as dessert. And this quote from Pine Tree, who sighs and says, in response to the statement, how dreadful it is to be poor. Poor is sad, but the rich do not experience deep, loving friendship. That just makes me think, some people are so poor, all they have is money, and it's so important to remember. I find it interesting that there's these references to what I think is electroshock therapy and the Vietnam War on page 98 and 99 that really situates this in the time. Okay, I really enjoy and relate to Lilac, who swoons at the thought of being legal. I mean, same. It's my dream to get gay married. And I find it interesting that then when they're made illegal again, Heavenly Blue is panicked. He takes to his bed to be alone with his fear, whereas Lilac is frantic with anger. I relate to both. I feel like personally I'm a Heavenly Blue moon and a Lilac sun. I enjoy what I think is a reference to Stonewall on page 104 and the idea of a collective shriek heard around the world. And I love the celebration on page 105 of the summer solstice, and how nice to be reading this book on the winter solstice. Wild roses, coffee in the garden, circle to the great goddess. I just love that so much. And I enjoy on page 108 that they go back to the devastated city to see what is to be done next, which is then followed by how to proceed, emerging wisdom from the women. I find it interesting that it's sort of like develop your resources to survive, and then what I interpret as ending capitalism when they say stop and do no thing. But then I was kind of, I don't know, like disturbed by the ending. Like I find it possibly kind of sinister. This idea of a disappearance into nothingness via abstinence, like that kind of reminds me of suicide, but it's presented in a way that's like, once the fairies no longer exist, the men who define themselves in contrast to the fairies will no longer exist either, and that will be the sort of end to the deathly dance of the men. But I don't know. So I'm really looking forward to our book club discussion so I can discuss this with you, Ophelias, and see what you think and how you interpret that. Our book club meeting is on Saturday, December 21 at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to come and haven't started yet, I think that you can totally read this book in a day. It is a pretty fast read. I would say it's very impactful and very delightful, but very fast. So could be good if you're also trying to wrap up like a reading challenge for the year. And yeah, even if you can't come, I would love to hear from you what you think of this book. I would love to know. So please do let me know in the comments or on Instagram. All my information will be linked in the description. And if you'd like to join us for book club next month, we'll be reading Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde, which is, I think, just in time for January 2025. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.